Hi there, this is Scott August, and in this video I want to talk to you about writing down your musical ideas for the Native American style flute. Now, have you ever come up with an idea on your flute and you want to write it down to remember to play later, and you go to write it down with finger symbols? I'm using X's here for all holes closed, and you're writing this down, and it takes so long to write each and every one of these 6 symbols, 6 holes for every single note, that you get a couple notes, maybe 3 in, and you start to forget what your tune was to begin with. And you go back and you pick up your flute, and now it's suddenly sounding different, and oh, what were you playing? I'm not really sure, right? This happens a lot. Or you're reading music that uses finger charts to display the music for the NAF, and it gets very jumbled in your head and very confusing. There's all these open and closed holes, and you don't know where things start and stop. It's very, very complicated. And it makes sense because you're using 6 symbols, 6 finger holes, to represent one note. There should be a better way to do this, and there actually is. It's called number tab. And what number tab does is it assigns a number to a specific fingering so that when you see that number, you play the fingering associated with. Or if you're writing down music for the NAF, you write down that number and it represents the fingering that you want the flute to play. Now, number tab is a system that I came up with based on something that musicians have been using for hundreds of years. It's called scale degrees. Now, scale degrees are where numbers are assigned to the notes in a scale, and it helps musicians keep track of what's going on in the scale, and sometimes harmony and chords are built from them, but we can use it just for playing the Native American flute. To illustrate how I came up with this, let's talk about a scale that we all know. It's the major scale. It's the Do-Re-Mi scale. We all know this scale. We've heard it many times. Do-Re-Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, and then Do. So that's a major scale. Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. Pardon my singing voice. Now, each one of these then will assign a scale degree to. It's a number. So obviously the first note gets 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is the major scale described in scale degrees. We have the 7 notes of the scale, and then we have the repetition of the root note twice as high, called the octave. And an octave is Latin for 8. So this makes sense. 8, octave. There you have it. Now, we can erase the solfege, and since we know we're talking about the major scale, we know what this means. This is the 7 notes of the scale in the octave. And this is true in a minor scale. A minor scale, even though the notes inside this sound a little bit different, it still has 7 notes plus an octave. Now, you may be asking yourself, how does this work for the NAF? The NAF plays a 5-note scale. The NAF plays a pentatonic minor scale. And penta, as you should know, is ancient Greek for 5, like pentagon. So when you have a natural 7-note minor scale and you want to get a 5-note pentatonic scale, you just remove 2 of the scale degrees. And when you're working from a natural minor scale and you want to get to a pentatonic minor scale, you remove scale degrees 2 and 6. Now these notes, the notes that are associated with these scale degrees, are not missing. They're still there. They're just not part of a pentatonic minor scale. For example, the 2nd scale degree you can play on your NAF by half holding the lower tone, the lower hole. Not very clean all the time, but it is still there. And scale degree 6, you can play that by lifting up the finger that you normally keep down. That will produce a 6. So that's why these gaps are there. The notes aren't gone, they're just not part of the scale. In fact, most commonly used pentatonic scales have a gap like this. Now, how number tab works is it takes each of these numbers and assigns it to be a shortcut for specific fingering. So note number 1 means all the holes covered. It's your lowest pitch, it's the lowest note of the scale. You cover all the holes, regardless of the key your flute is in. We know that note 2 is not there unless you half hole, and it's not part of the pentatonic minor scale. What is the next note, which is represented as 3, which means lift the bottom finger. Okay? Then we have 4, which means lift the bottom 2 fingers, keep the rest covered. 5 is the top 3 holes covered, the bottom 3 uncovered. 7 is the very unusual fingering to display, at least I think it is, of the top hole covered, the next hole uncovered, the next hole covered, the next 3 uncovered. I mean, that's a lot to describe to somebody if you're telling them how to play this note. But instead, if you teach them this fingering and say, well, this is 7, then from then on, you can just say 7. I'm playing 7, or play 7. And you don't have to explain this over and over and over again. And then finally, we get to the octave, which is the 4th hole from the bottom covered only. And again, this is important. Since this is the octave, it has to remain 8 because the octave is the root twice as high. It's a specific pitch that is 8. Now, let's look at this in action. Let's say we want to play something very stereotypical on a Native American flute. For example, I'll play these few notes. Something we hear a lot, or some variation on that. So I started with all the holes covered, then I lifted the bottom 3 holes, and that equals the fingering associated with 5. Then I left these 2 holes open, that's associated with 4, and then I returned to 5. So in less time than it would take me to write down 1 as open and close holes, I can write down this little phrase. And I can play it in any key. That was G, here it is in A. Very, very powerful, very, very fast. Let's try something else. Let's say I want to just write something that goes up the scale and back down again. 1, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 1. I was able to do that almost as fast as it would take me to write down just the first one. Let's start on A this time. Very easy to make sense. And you can actually see I'm going up and then I'm coming down. And you can associate that in your mind with going up in pitch and coming down. Here's in G. Let's look at one more idea before we finish. I'm going to start with 5 now, which is half open, half closed. I'm going to go up 1 note to 7, back down to 5, and I'm going to head back to the root note. 5, 7, 5, 4, 3, 1. It's like a combination in a way. And again, I'll try this in another key. That was G, this is A. Well, that's a quick introduction to number tab, where we take a number and we assign it to a specific fingering for the Native American style flute, and we can write down that number instead of having to write down all the finger symbols associated with it. It's very fast and it's very powerful. Now, in later videos, we'll look at how we can express simple and basic rhythms, and we'll also talk about the numbers that are associated with the other pitches that the Native American flute will play. The Native American flute will play the 6, for example. It will play the 2. It'll play a flat 5 if you'd like to play blues. And we'll talk about the notes that are associated with them and the numbers that we use for them. In the meantime, enjoy your nap, and I'll see you in the next video.